Brittany, lovely to have you on the program. Again, this time in a virtual setting. For those that didn't have the pleasure of seeing you earlier on in the month, we'd love to hear a quick 60-second background about the work that you're doing at CVS Health right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a lead director on some of our wellness platforms, looking at how can we make it easier to be healthy. My talk at the summit focused on my expertise based on the breadth of my career, so not just my work at CVS, which I'll look forward to, talking in that same broad spectrum today, but looking across the healthcare ecosystem between private sector, academia, public sector. What does that mean for all of these different stakeholders about how we could leverage AI for population behavior change?
We've heard a few of the speakers today talk about how important behavioral focus is when it comes to dealing with patients. How is AI, especially currently being used to influence behavior change? And of course, from your perspective, at a scale in public health initiatives right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I talk about behavior change, I'm thinking about how we eat, how we sleep, how we get around, how we move, how we interact with one another. And all of those behaviors are determinants of chronic disease. And we've only seen that incidence rising. But in the last, I would say, 20 years, our world has become increasingly digital, and now there's this data abundance. And we're now kind of at the beginning of a new chapter where we're now starting to make meaning of this data, which makes it very impactful. So when we're thinking about AI and what can happen at the population level, we're now creating a layer on top of that data. And when I say, this data abundance, I'm talking about physiological sensors, we have our activity history, we have wearables, there's browser data on all of the different tools and platforms we engage with. We have geolocalization data based on our maps and how we move around. There's weather data. People are even using personal CGMs these days. And all of those are now inputs into AI. And what I think is really exciting is that we're now seeing the advent of these health coaches. So these AI-powered health assistants, and whether that is in your phone, whether that is facilitated by your wearable, whether that is in your internet platform or your Gen AI tool of choice, we now have a way to make meaning of that data. And that's where I see a lot of potential, where we're going to see the ability to make sense of it, to personalize interventions at scale. And that's really the difference that AI is going to allow, is that instead of going in the inverse, which has traditionally been the case in health intervention design, where we start at the top, at the population, and try to make it work for the individual. We're now starting in the opposite, where we can build for the individual and scale that out to populations.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the topic of interventions, what are some of the examples of successful AI-powered interventions that have improved health outcomes in the real world communities that you've observed?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say those health coaches, which are examples that use Gen AI, are new, and we don't yet have the data there. And I'm very curious to see what studies will be conducted to evaluate those today. You could even see it in terms of the hiring patterns of some of these large tech companies, that this is now a priority where they're trying to invest. But if we're looking at AI and the impact in public health so far, a lot of that has been in older versions of AI, so not generative AI. So, and we have to remember, I think it's very easy to get lost in conversations right now with generative AI as the newest tool and because of its accessibility to the masses. But AI has historically been based on machine learning rather than the focus on natural language processing today. And if we're looking at machine learning, AI has really been at the basis of a lot of disease forecasting. That if we look at prediction and surveillance and understanding trends in populations, that is the bread and butter of public health departments. And if you're looking at epidemiology, so I think it's important not to lose sight of that, that AI is bigger than Gen AI.
Mm.
And it's really important for any team to consider their problem first before assigning a tool to use it. So, what is it that you're trying to solve? What is it that is the pain point for your end user? And then consider the tool that would make most sense to solve it. And I think it's very easy to get caught up in the latest and greatest and trying to use the most newfangled invention, but that's not always what's most appropriate. So I think there's a tremendous history of other data-based solutions that have been effective. And I think it's important to keep that breadth of consideration when developing new products.
Yeah, that's definitely really important to keep top of mind for sure. Um, One of the things that Effie just talked about was around making sure that we have technology to be, deployed equitably and stuff, especially to historically marginalized and rural populations. How is it that we can ensure, especially AI tools, are built and deployed equitably?
Absolutely. So I think it really matters about the inputs. So when we're looking at ethical considerations, there are a few things to keep in mind to make sure that these solutions are being built equitably. So first, we have to think about data quality. Data out is only as good as the data that goes in. So if we're training certain models, we need to consider what has informed their development. And right now, if we're building on AI models, which is definitely, what most people want to talk about, um, the general models might not be most impactful for your population, or you might need to consider what was this trained on? Has this considered the nuances of my population? And that really goes back to some of the basics of public health intervention design when you're looking at implementation science, you often have to consider cultural adaptation. Is this applicable for the people that I'm trying to help? One thing in particular there is, language. Does this model react or behave as effectively for non-English speakers? What about those with low levels of literacy? Is it really contingent on phrasing certain prompts well, or if you're especially asking for responses and more like agentic solutions where there's a dynamic conversation back and forth, often uh, things don't go as well if you're not phrasing things exactly as they're expecting it to be phrased. So I think being prepared for that and testing things is super important. And that comes back to evaluation as well. Like we can't assume that things have been built the way you want them to have been built, especially if you didn't train them yourself. So you could use AI on itself for that evaluation. Give the prompts of, is this going to work as well for someone with a reading level below the fourth grade, which we know is the standard in products targeting the Medicaid market in the United States? How is it for, someone who can't speak articulately? What if someone is not verbal? What are other ways to engage with this? Are there any accessibility concerns? Feed the AI the accessibility guidelines or compliance standard that you're using. But I think it's important if you're starting to build on top of public models, or if you're not working with a specialized trained models, there's definitely new companies that are building those especially trained models today, but develop that framework, develop that rubric, and test it out. And you'll see that different products will yield different solutions. So I think it's really important not to expect, even though it often feels like magic, it's not. It was built by humans for a specific use case, which wasn't yours. And if you weren't in that room, we need to consider how to evaluate it to make sure that it can be equitable and inclusive. But I think until policy catches up, that onus is really on the stakeholders leveraging these tools to ensure that they meet their needs. But hopefully, we get to that point where those considerations are accounted for by regulation.
Yeah, what like are there any sort of specific ethical considerations, like sort of further that you feel that should be addressed when using the AI to sort of nudge or modify health behaviors in essence?
Yeah, so I think when we're also thinking about ethical considerations, like we really need to consider trust, and how data is being used. What is that ownership? Does the end user really understand how their personal information will be leveraged
Mm,
by the entity that, is absorbing it? I think you really need to build that trust and institute governance protocols, which remains a huge barrier to adoption, especially if we're looking at those populations who could most benefit
mm,
from new solutions and who have been historically excluded from other interventions. It's really important that they have trust in the products that are being delivered to them. So I think it's really important to consider who is the face of that solution. So especially if we're talking about this coaching or personalized prevention, I think collaboration is really key. That public-private partnerships are essential for meaningful impact, and considering how can you layer on those elements of trust on top of technology that was developed by the private sector, because that's often, it's not necessarily part of their end goals, but I think it's by creating those shared goals and ensuring there are stakeholders who have those best interests uh, at top of mind that we'll see success there. Because I think we're at this cataclysmic moment where the decisions we make are going to affect the longevity of these solutions. Will the populations who we can potentially help the most buy into these tools, or will we push them away? I think, public health, there's been a lot of lessons in history in the US about how individuals were taken advantage of by researchers, why populations have shunned, new interventions because of that lack of trust and
mm.
because they haven't been considered shared partners in that implementation. And I think in this new chapter, there's an opportunity to do things better and to do things right. I think we've learned a lot um, o over decades, I would say even centuries at this point. And as the people making those decisions now, can we do better? That can we ensure that these new interventions are equitably distributed and that we consider, you know, the rights of everyone who will be touched by this new technology?
Yeah, some really important considerations to take into account, I think, especially, as you said, when you're looking at the larger scale of, public health and population health, there's so many different levels of health literacy and just sort of overall understanding as to you know how to navigate the healthcare system and so forth. And it really is important to use AI to the best effect to address all those pieces. Just to round off, Brittany, if you look into Brittany's crystal ball for the next sort of 3 to 5 years, with AI and just digital health technology in general rapidly evolving. How do you see AI evolving in the sort of those in the next couple of years when it comes to preventing, predicting, and also modifying health behaviors across all the different populations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this combination of generative AI and this influx of data sources has really democratized access to personalized health insights. And I think the question is, how is that going to become scalable to everyone? So if I had a crystal ball and if I was able to, wave my magic wand that we see the industry move in the direction that I would hope it moves, is, everyone has their own personal health AI assistant. You have your own personal health coach, that it's based on your inputs and what matters to you. Because even if two people, if the two of us had the same health conditions, if we live in the exact same place, if we have the same literacy language, we still won't be exactly the same. There still will be nuances to each of us and our goals, especially when you think about behavior change, our sources of motivation. And that's really internal to us of what drives us, what is going to make me most likely to take action to see improvements in my health outcomes. So you start to see changes in that incidence curve of chronic disease. And in 3 to 5 years, I would hope we start bending that curve, that because we all have these individually tailored solutions, that we could, that it's finally easier to change behaviors. It's so hard. Anyone who has worked on it themselves, all of us has an element that, for which we're not perfect, that we wish our behaviors were better. And if we could actually make that easier, and that's been the question we've been working on for so long. I've been working in this space over a decade. It's still the question that I think about every day. How can we make it easier to be healthy? I hope in the next 3 to 5 years we have that it is easier.
No, absolutely. Brittany, thanks so much for coming onto the program and sharing your insights with us. It's such a pleasure to speak with you. And I wish we could have had more time to flesh out, how AI is being used for public impact and so forth. But I do encourage everybody in the audience to connect with Brittany. We did put her LinkedIn details in the chat, and it was a pleasure to be able to see you in person as well. And hopefully, we'll have you back on the program again soon, Brittany, to talk further about this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jerry.
Thanks so much.